You sit down on a Sunday evening, open a spreadsheet, and run the numbers. You made decent money this year, you spent reasonably, you didn't go crazy, and yet when you look at your savings account, the number staring back at you feels smaller than it should. Familiar feeling? You didn't waste money on anything dramatic, no impulsive car purchase, no reckless vacation. You were, by most definitions, responsible. And still, the gap between what you earned and what you actually kept is wider than your mental math suggested. That gap has a name. Most people just never learn it. Here's the thing most financially aware people don't want to admit. The problem isn't always spending too much. Sometimes it's the quiet, invisible forces working against your savings before you even get a chance to make a decision. Forces that don't show up in your budget app, they show up in your net worth. Think about a physician in her mid-40s, solid income, disciplined, maxes her retirement contributions every year. She tells herself she saves around 22% of her income, but when her financial planner actually ran the full picture, the real number was closer to 11. She was genuinely surprised. Most people in her position are. That gap isn't unusual. It's actually remarkably common among high earners and working professionals. And honestly, it's one of the most psychologically confusing parts of personal finance, because you can do everything right on paper and still watch your actual wealth grow far slower than your income would logically suggest it should. So what's happening? Where does the money go? Not to obvious things, not to impulse buys or subscription bloat. The real erosion happens in layers, subtle layers that compound quietly over years. Most of them are structural, built into the system, and understanding them requires stepping back from the spreadsheet and looking at the actual architecture of modern middle-class financial life. Let's start with taxes, because this is where the illusion begins. When professionals calculate their savings rate, they almost always start with gross income. That already sets the calculation off. By the time federal tax, state tax, Social Security, and Medicare come out, you're working with significantly less. The number you save is a percentage of a much smaller base than you realize. And that's before we even touch what inflation does to the purchasing power of whatever you actually set aside. Saving $5,000 feels meaningful, but if inflation runs at 4%, that $5,000 is quietly worth less each month it sits still. The number doesn't change, the value does. That distinction matters more than most people track. There's a metaphor that captures this well. Imagine filling a bucket with water. You're pouring steadily, consistently, but the bucket has small holes drilled near the bottom. Not obvious holes, not dramatic ones. You can still see water rising, progress feels real, but the bucket never actually fills. That's what saving inside a structurally leaky system looks like in practice. Those holes have names. Taxes are one, inflation is another, then comes healthcare. If you're in the United States especially, healthcare costs have risen faster than wages for over 2 decades. Premiums, deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, these aren't discretionary expenses. They extract real money from real savings before your savings rate calculation ever becomes honest. Then there's what behavioral economists call lifestyle inflation. And this one is subtle because it doesn't feel irresponsible. You earn more, so your housing costs a bit more, your car is slightly nicer, your kids are in better schools. Every upgrade felt earned and reasonable in isolation. Together, they moved your cost of living baseline up faster than your savings rate moved with it. Honestly, this isn't about judgment. Lifestyle inflation isn't a character flaw. It's a rational response to earning more in a society that constantly signals what the next level of comfort should look like. The pressure is real, the marketing is relentless, and for professionals in their peak earning years, the social context of spending is almost impossible to separate from genuine financial decision-making. This is the reflective part most finance content skips. The question isn't just what are you spending money on, it's why does the spending feel justified, even when the math doesn't hold. There's a psychological dimension here that spreadsheets can't fully capture. We anchor our sense of financial health to income level, not to actual wealth accumulation. That anchor is quietly misleading. Consider a second scenario. A couple, both professionals, household income in the upper tier of their city. They genuinely believe they're saving 15 to 18% annually. They're educated, financially literate, but when you account for their effective tax rate, rising insurance costs, mortgage interest, childcare, and modest but consistent lifestyle creep, the actual real savings rate is closer to 6 or 7% every year. That's not a crisis narrative, it's a structural reality, and the gap between perceived savings and actual savings is almost always wider for people who earn more, because the system extracts proportionately more from higher earners, while the cost of professional life quietly expands to fill whatever income is available. Understanding that dynamic is the beginning of seeing your finances more accurately.
So how do you start seeing the real number? The first step is brutal honesty about what counts as saving. A retirement contribution that you can't touch for 20 years is not the same as liquid, accessible wealth. A home equity position that fluctuates with the market is not a savings account. Conflating these categories inflates your perceived savings rate significantly and consistently. There's also the question of what financial planners call savings drag. Every time you dip into savings for a car repair, a medical bill, a family emergency, the headline savings rate stays the same in your mind, but the actual accumulated balance tells a different story. Life expenses don't pause because you have a savings plan. They interrupted constantly, quietly, without fanfare. And here's where the structural pressure on the middle class becomes genuinely worth examining. Wages for professionals have grown, but the cost of the things that matter most to professional life have grown faster. Housing in major metropolitan areas, university costs for children, healthcare, elder care. These are not luxury categories. They are the actual infrastructure of middle-class life, and they are all inflating aggressively. The tax system compounds this further in ways that most professionals underestimate until they sit with an accountant and actually feel the weight of it. Marginal rates, capital gains, state taxes, property taxes, estate considerations. Each layer takes something. Not dramatically, not in ways that feel like theft, just steadily, quietly, like the bucket with the small holes draining slightly faster than you pour. You know what makes this harder to see in real time? Progress. Most professionals are genuinely moving forward. Income rises, net worth grows, even if slowly. The 401k balance increases, so there's no alarm going off, no crisis signal, just a persistent low-grade sense that you should have more by now, given how hard you've worked and how carefully you've tried to manage things. That low-grade sense is actually important data. It's not anxiety to dismiss, it's your financial intuition telling you that the headline numbers and the actual numbers are not fully aligned. Most people suppress that feeling because engaging with it requires confronting uncomfortable structural realities rather than just adjusting a budget line or cutting a subscription. The gap also widens because of how we mentally account for future savings versus present savings. Professionals often tell themselves they'll save more next year, when the raise comes, when the mortgage is lower, when the kids finish school. But each of those milestones tends to bring new financial demands rather than automatically unlocking more savings. The future savings narrative is one of the most persistent financial illusions in middle-class life. Basically, the overestimation isn't a math error in the narrow sense, it's a systems error. You're calculating one variable correctly while holding several others constant that are actually moving against you. Inflation moves, taxes move, costs move, healthcare moves, lifestyle moves. The savings number might be technically accurate for a single month, but the real picture requires tracking all those forces simultaneously over years. This is where financial strategy diverges from financial literacy. Most financially literate people know the principles. Spend less than you earn, invest early, diversify. Those principles are correct, but incomplete. Strategy asks a different question. Given all the forces working against your savings, what structural moves protect your real accumulation over time? That's a harder question, and it matters more. It means looking seriously at tax-efficient structures. It means understanding the difference between gross and net savings in a way that changes your actual targets. It means adjusting for inflation in your projections rather than using nominal figures. It means stress testing your savings rate against realistic cost increases rather than assuming the baseline holds. These aren't advanced techniques, they're honest accounting. If we're being real, the professionals who build genuine wealth over time are not necessarily the highest earners. They're the ones who developed an accurate picture of their real savings rate early enough to make structural adjustments. Not panic, not dramatic lifestyle sacrifice. Structural adjustments. Small calibrations made consistently over years that keep the bucket filling faster than the holes drain it. Think back to that Sunday evening, the spreadsheet open, the savings number smaller than expected. That feeling isn't failure. It isn't evidence that you've been irresponsible or careless. It's evidence that you're operating inside a system that extracts quietly and rewards those who see it clearly. The discomfort of that moment is actually the beginning of something more accurate. The physician who discovered her real savings rate was 11% instead of 22% didn't fall apart. She recalibrated. She shifted her tax strategy. She adjusted her projections. She stopped measuring against the gross figure. Within 3 years, her actual accumulated wealth was growing faster than it had during the entire previous decade of higher nominal saving. Clarity is more powerful than effort alone. The couple with the 6% real savings rate made one structural change. They stopped anchoring their savings target to income and started anchoring it to actual post-tax, post-cost reality. The number they needed to save genuinely shifted, not because they earned more, but because they finally understood what they were actually working with. That's the whole insight. Simple, hard to see, worth everything. So the next time you sit down with that spreadsheet, run a different calculation. Not what percentage of gross income went into savings. Ask what percentage of your real, post-tax, post-inflation, post-structural cost income actually accumulated into accessible, growing wealth. That number will be smaller than the one you've been telling yourself, and knowing it, clearly and honestly, is exactly where the real work begins.